Hello, and welcome back to our podcast series on all things coaching and higher education. I'm your host, Tim Jansa, a certified leadership and organizational development coach, and I'm joined today by James Walton, the president of Collaborative Brain Trust, a national firm that offers coaching and consulting services to higher ed institutions across the country. I've invited James to join us today to take our conversation in a slightly different direction and look at the business side of offering coaching services to higher ed clients, more from a provider's perspective, something I believe every coach will definitely want to know. So let's cue the intro and let's get started. Hello there, James, and welcome to the show.
Thanks, Tim. Super excited to be here. Very grateful for you having me. I do think it's pretty exciting to talk about a different side of the business that maybe a lot of the listeners here are going to hear. So really excited to share some of my experiences and lessons learned. But really thankful that you invited me and excited to have this conversation.
Absolutely, James. When I was thinking about the different topics for this podcast, and I was talking to a lot of coaches, I was also thinking, well, we're not really looking at the other side of the coin, so to speak, which is the business side. And myself, leading a bench of coaches for a big institutional client and being on the bench myself of a couple of organizations, I thought, what great topic it would be to actually talk to somebody who runs this business and who does this day in, day out. Because, the people that I've spoken with over the last couple of episodes, they all have shared their experiences as, coaches in colleges and universities, especially big research institutions. So the administrative side of offering and running a coaching program is something that we just haven't had a chance to look at yet. So I'm super excited about it. So you speak with a lot of top-level institutional leaders across the country on a pretty regular basis. And I'm wondering, how do you use what you hear from them regarding their pain points and the things that they need help with to actually get the ball rolling and eventually, hopefully, get a contract signed with that institution? How do you do that? What's your process?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I like the way you put that, too, because I talk to a lot of coaches, too. And I talk to a lot of coaches that are with us and then a lot of coaches that we work with together on a bigger project at a university or somewhere else, internally and externally. So we're kind of similar in the ways, when I was chuckling when you said you talked to a lot of coaches, because a lot of similar aspects. It's a very good question because the pain points, the needs, the wants that I hear is quite different than, let's say, what a coach hears. And hopefully that's valuable, and I think it will be to a lot of your listeners. I would put them in two groups. So if I were to say, here's the pain points I hear from a college or university, on one bucket is the pain points of, we need more accountability, we need more trust. They're very topic and theme oriented, like we need help around this or that. And that's great because that helps really narrow down how we can help, the different formats, the different coaches that we have that we can apply. That gets me straight to the problem right away, whether it's team coaching, individual coaching, whatnot. And if anybody is listening and they're thinking about what might those themes be, especially in higher ed, I think they're pretty much the same as private sector, other nonprofit. They're probably the same, right? We need better communication. We need to manage egos better. We need to deal with toxic people better. There's some newer themes, but they're probably the same themes. It starts to get a little interesting when you need to have some background and expertise in higher ed, when you're getting into governance, like how to build a better governance strategy. There's some things like that are kind of higher ed focused, but for the most part, I think that whole bucket is the same. The other bucket, though, I think that I hear more often than probably a coach is that you have decision makers that are building coaching programs, or they're a new dean, a new president, and we hear other things like, oh yeah, we've done a lot of coaching in the past and it has not worked. Or we've bought a lot of coaching programs and nobody wants to show up to them. There's no traction. They're very expensive. There's a whole different element there that has always been kind of an uphill climb for me, but also something we look forward to because we get to showcase how we're a little bit different, how we focus on fit, how we come from higher ed. Most of our folks have significant experience in higher ed. So day one, they're going to speak the terminology. They get the culture. That localization is incredibly important. So I get to hear kind of all the horror stories around coaching that hasn't worked really well. And that's a whole different bucket of pain points that we get to adhere to as well and explain how we could solve that. So those are kind of the two buckets that I hear in a day-to-day. It might be a little bit different than what you and other coaches might hear too.
That is super interesting and something I hadn't really thought of. Because, when I talk to coaches, yes, mostly the people then who I interact with on campuses are the ones who actually run the programs on campus. They're employees by that university, but I don't really necessarily talk to the higher level decision makers. So I'm actually super intrigued by this whole idea of them having had tried coaching programs and it just didn't work. And you said that what you're trying to impress upon them is that you run the program for fit. You make sure that the people who are working for you and in CBT's name actually come from higher ed. And I've addressed this, elsewhere. It's so important for coaches in higher ed to actually have somewhat of a higher ed experience or appreciation and understanding, because it's such a weird area. So when somebody tells you that they've tried coaching before, it just didn't work, it didn't gain traction, how do you then address that? What do you say to them to also impress upon them the ROI of coaching that, or at least the type of coaching that you would be offering to them, so that they would say, yeah, let's try this. This is something we haven't tried yet. What do you do?
There's an example that came up a few months ago. It was a college in California near LA, and they called asking for some DEI help. And DEI is a very sensitive topic now, so I kind of get all that. And they said, we're doing a lot of things. We know kind of what we want, both kind of strategically, but then also what we publicly talk about. Like we kind of know what we want, but it's just not working. Like again, the traction's not there. We're getting a little lost. And I asked one question, and I said, and this is an example, and I mean this in a very positive way too, because everybody in higher ed is always doing really good things. And this is my 22nd year in higher ed. Like I've seen it all as well. And the question I asked was, let me guess, the person leading the DEI development, training, all of that internally is somebody that is internal and just volunteered to do it because they were just there at the right place, right time. And now they're doing it. And they said, yes, that's exactly what happened. Because that I've seen many times. And so I can answer your question a few different ways, but I've seen that example so many times where it's like, we're all smart people in higher ed, but a lot of times we don't know a lot about professional development. We don't know a lot about coaching. We don't know a lot about even training and what that really means. And especially in the 2-year space, and I know we'll talk a lot about 2-year space, soft skills training and professional development are lumped together. And so when they say professional development, I'm like, well, you got to explain what you're talking about when you say that. So what happens a lot is if you don't understand what really good coaching is, what really good professional leadership development is, and I didn't know either. Like we built our program in 2017 from scratch. If you don't really know what it is, you don't really know what you're looking for. And so you kind of get away with accepting, yeah, someone's just leading our Title IX training who just happened to be there. And that's not really great. And I think when you hire external coaches and you don't know what to ask for and you're not focused on fit, the same thing can happen. It's like if you have zero expertise in DEI development in higher ed and you just come off the street, well, you might be really great at it, but you're going to lose people. You're not going to get the nuances that exist. You're not going to get the terminology. Things are going to fall through the cracks and people start to tune you out. And I think that's what's happened a lot too, is that we went on Google, we hired an exceptional coach with blah, 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 and then they come in and then we immediately lose them and it doesn't work. We've heard that a lot too. And I'm not speaking bad about those other groups, but I just mean that every industry, I think the further we go, and now in 2025 and beyond, this idea of fit and localization is incredibly important because all the AI, all the other things that are out there, we need something that's very relevant and has substance that really relates to us. That's how you really get buy-in. If people are tuning you out, then why are you even doing this at that point?
Fit and localization. How do you accomplish that in the way you direct your program, in the way you select your coaches, in the way you approach the decision makers? How do you guarantee that?
Yeah, I can tell you what we do, and I'm trying to think of the best way for your listeners as well, because this is how I say from, let's say, a marketing perspective to a potential, client university, client college. I say that we have people that have sat in the seat, have significant experience in the industry or in these different roles or whatnot. And then we also have certified coaches from International Coaching Federation, and they're also certified in different assessments and all across the board. We have licensed psychologists. And then our sweet spot is we have people that have done both. And that's pretty unique in the industry. I think they exist. There's a lot of people out there. but that's pretty unique as well. So with those three different groups, when someone's looking for a need or a coach, and keeping in mind that a lot of the needs are somewhat confidential, to some degree, and what they tell me is going to be different what they tell a coach on an interview, for example. So I can basically kind of walk them through what those different groups of people might mean. And we have folks that also came from private sector that now have higher experience. And so as universities hire more private sector folks to come be like a VP of marketing, which is very common, we have folks that have done in higher ed, have done in private sector, Fortune 100 companies, and now they kind of bring all those things to the table. So we do a very simple triage, kind of what are you looking for? Tell me a little bit more about what goals and outcomes look like. Anything that you can share. And then I can immediately come up with a few different names. Here's the people that might fit really well. Mm-hmm. And taking everything into account. Also what people look like, male, female, older, younger. That's really important in terms of fit as well. So we try to be very non-biased, but at the same time, we kind of know what they're looking for. And so when we usually give them 2 or 3 names, they'll pick probably 1 or 2 to set up an interview. And then they're kind of off to the races from that. You kind of always see that magic happen where the fit happens. They love each other. And then they're just off to the races. So that's always a fun part as well. The only thing we don't do is remedial coaching. And I think there's a lot of your coaches probably feel the same way. There's just not a lot of good that comes out of dealing with a problem employee. So we really approach that in a different way with team coaching. But that's the only part that starts to get tricky with coach matching and things.
Interesting. So what you just addressed is something that I have noticed as well. When you run a program like that, you really need to know your coaches. I mean, I know there are a lot of coaches out there, or a lot of coaching programs rather out there, where they have a bench of, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100, coaches. But other than just the basic demographics, maybe they don't really, I think, know. They just maybe hand their clients a list. Here's a bunch of people. And then just pick one, whatever, if you like their name or their nose or whatever. Yeah. So you really have to, it's a leadership aspect, really. You need to know your coaches. You need to know their strengths, their where they can make the greatest contribution, their personalities, and then just instinctively match that with what you sense the need is for your clients. So I'm sure it exceeds just certification and assessments. Would you say that is true?
Yeah. And I think for a lot of your coaches that have been listening, they're probably wondering, well, maybe I don't have higher ed experience, or maybe I haven't sat in those seats. I think that's totally fine. I'm very surprised at how many coaches or clients and coaches would select a coach. And I'm kind of like, I don't think they're going to pick this person. And they end up picking that person that isn't a certified coach, but they just jive from the part. A lot of times, not every, you know this, right? Not every coachee or client is looking to dramatically change their life. They're just looking for someone that gives them support, someone to talk to and work through these things and kind of uplift them, whether that's, professionally, emotionally sometimes, and other things. And so that means that you have to jive with that person so well. So a lot of our coaches that aren't certified, I always recommend, hey, if you look into it, I'm not suggesting that you do it, but look into getting certified. You might really like it. And then for other folks that think, I don't know if I could fit in well with you, James, and your team, and based on your clients and contracts you have with universities and colleges, I was never a dean before. I'm like, it doesn't matter. What they're really looking for is structure, vibing with that person, and trust. You know this, right? Like, that's the most important thing. When we get a request that says, I'm looking for a coach, but they have to have sat in the CTO role or a dean of engineering, I'm like, respectfully, that's not us. We don't do that. Like, we're not looking to fit. Yeah, you might. I don't know that you know this either. We don't do that. We had a lot of instances like that, and we're like, if you're picking someone based on what you're perceiving as going to be the most successful for that, we've already lost, because then you're saying that I got to go find someone that number one requirement is they sat in that exact role before. So you're saying it doesn't really matter how well a fit they are, how well they communicate. We're the complete opposite. We're all about, like, do they understand your job? Yes. Cool. Are they trustworthy? Do they know coaching? Do they know what? Yes. Are they going to be supportive of you? Yes. It's completely different. And so we had a lot of back and forth with our internal team and a lot of our existing clients that we're still partnered with. And we had to tell them, if that's how you're thinking, that's not for us. And I'm not saying that everyone should feel that way. We're just structured philosophically very different from that. Successful coaching is really based on a lot of other things, not your background and role per se in a very particular role. So we've walked away from a lot of those opportunities too.
I love hearing that, James, because ultimately, really, it's about the client and moving the client forward. Because a lot of times what happens when they work with somebody who is basically is just a replicate of themselves, how can you possibly move somebody out of that role or allow them to grow and develop and explore different areas of development that may not come naturally to them? So, James, one thing I wanted to quickly hone in on, you mentioned assessments earlier. Do you have any advice or any experience, like which assessments are particularly en vogue, popular, requested by institutional clients right now?
Yeah, because I know a lot of your listeners either are, single person coach LLC, for example, or maybe they're also part of a bunch of other groups, kind of like you are with us as well. Everyone's kind of different in that way. And I know that, I don't know if it's a growing trend. It seems like it is that companies, organizations, institutions are looking to standardize on certain assessments. And so some of our big contracts are like that, where you have to be Hogan certified to be a coach in our program. Like that is one of them. Literally, that's what it says. When you apply for everything, that you got to be that. And then you go through and say, am I Hogan certified? Do I know people that are Hogan certified? And I think that there's a lot of leeway as well, meaning that if one of your listeners isn't, for example, Hogan certified and someone's asking them to coach, but you have to be Hogan certified. What I found is like very nice leeway is that companies, they've accepted, hey, I can find a partner that can do the Hogan assessment. I'm still going to do the coaching. And you partner together like that. So that's a great thing. I think that's worked out really well. We as an organization don't standardize on any and say, hey, Tim, John Doe, whoever Jane Doe joins us, you have to use X. We don't. We're more philosophically, you're the professionals, you do what you do. We know how to put together contracts, and whether it's a quantitative assessment, qualitative assessment, that's between you and the client and perhaps their supervisor sometimes, and then they just have to approve it, whatnot. But we've kind of seen a little bit of everything. We'd certainly, lean more towards 360 being really powerful and really valuable, both in individual and team coaching. So it just depends on kind of what that need is, but it's the same philosophical approach of fit. We wouldn't give them an assessment. Just kind of like when you were talking about the client that just hired you and they were very analytical. They didn't give you a test, right? They didn't give you a test to say, hey, pass this analytical test and then we'll see if you're the right coach. We're kind of the same way. We trust our coaches that they're going to think through and apply the best assessment that should be given to their client. And if they can't do it or the contract requires them to do something different, we have really good partners that come in and do different things that make it work. So I think that model, at least right now in 2025, seems to be working really well. So I'd say any coach that doesn't have XYZ, it doesn't mean you're excluded. Just find a partner that you can work with. And I think that's the beauty of coaching, is that we're all one big family.
That's great. That's good to know. And I've experienced that as well. So I'm, Wiley Everything DISC certified. Hogan is another one that I hear a lot. I know there's Leadership Circle, for example, has been counted on. So some of them, but again, getting certified in those assessments it takes a lot of time, is also very expensive to some extent. So I think I've actually given this advice to some, burgeoning coaches, especially in the higher ed space, where I told him exactly what you just mentioned, James, is like, find somebody who has some certification in an assessment that might come up with that you think might be useful, and then partner with them and, find a way to provide that service still to your client without you actually having to go through the certification process. James, we're slowly kind of getting to the end. So I wanted to ask you, we've touched on this a little bit. What are you hearing, or what's your experience between, let's say, 2-year institutions and 4-year institutions in terms of their needs, the way they run coaching programs, the way they formulate their expectations and their needs? Because in one of the conversations you and I have had, you mentioned that there certainly is a big difference between 2-year and 4-year institutions. Maybe you can touch on that for a second.
Yeah, sure. And I think that it's something that you'll see more of as well, because I was pretty floored when I first learned all of this, and you kind of learn, I wouldn't say the hard way, but it's just so drastically different, I think, in the 2-year and 4-year. So I come from the 4-year space. I was at Ohio State, West Virginia University. I spent a lot of time in the consulting circuit. And there is, hands down, a culture of leadership, development in universities. So that means the university, your department, is willing to pay for a coach for you to improve yourself and grow in your role and potentially even leave your role, right? So in the university, it's common that the university is paying for you to have a professional coach to go become a president somewhere else. That's pretty interesting. And I think you trickle that down to all different levels of the institution. It starts to get into the auxiliary areas too, like IT and facilities. It's now become accustomed to be okay that, hey, I'm now associate vice president in facilities management. I would love to have an executive coach or something. And then they say, yeah, that's great. That's a great thing. It's a philosophy and a culture that people really buy into. In the 2-year space, it's quite different. And I would say there's 3 reasons for that. One is cost. So we'll put that. We kind of know that. The budgets are smaller. They're different. I think the other one is this idea of precedent. I'll explain that as well. And then the whole cultural piece. So the cost aspect is, again, we just don't have the same amount of money. When we're doing maybe team coaching, a retreat in a 4-year institution, on-site, off-site, whatever. This is a very expensive thing. Like this is a big, investment that they're making, and they believe that return is going to come through. They have either psychologically or philosophically and principally, they know what they're getting out of it. It's what we do in the 4-year world, right? The 2-year world is not like that. They don't really know what they're getting to some degree, and so the price point for them, the price sensitivity for them is quite different in the 2-year space. And so what a lot of times happens, again, is that they're bringing in maybe an expert, a 2-year expert that used to work there or something. That's very common. And so obviously it's very price effective. It's, $100 an hour, maybe less than that. I don't know what. And then they're just coming in to kind of help facilitate, right? It's not really the same exact thing. And this is not me talking bad about, 2 years, and it's just different. It's just a different culture. And so again, I mentioned earlier that professional development, soft skills, and training are all kind of lumped together. They just call it support or professional development. It's just the same thing. So a lot of times you're just asking for a few different things in there. The second one is precedent. Again, you just don't have that history of those things happening. If you're a new president in a 2-year or a chancellor in a 2-year district, you go in there, there's not a history of this happening. So you don't want to be the first one. You don't want to be the one to say, oh, let's go do this. I had it at my old place. I've seen it a lot where a 4-year person goes to a 2-year and says, hey, I had this great coach and they came in and did this great team retreat and all that. And they're like, we're not doing that. We don't do that here. How much is it? Like, we don't do that. That's not what we do. Like, that's a very different thing. And so they do retreats, they do team retreat, but it's a different catalog of people that come in to do that. So the precedent there of that is just not happening. And then also, if you're a brand new hire and you go to your board, so you're the sole employee of the board, a publicly elected board, again, different than 4-year. You're the sole employee and you say, hey, I just got this job. Thanks for hiring me as the new president. I'd love to have an executive coach. I think it'd really help me do the job better. They're like, whoa, pump the brakes. This is what I had to get my head around. They're like, pump the brakes. We just hired you to the job. You should know how to do the job. Like, this is why we hired you. Again, very different. Whereas recently, a new chancellor of a big state system, a major big state system in the U.S., day one, they asked us, hey, can you help us find a coach for this person? They proactively went. It's a very different philosophy. And the third one is the culture. It's kind of this idea that your internal people, they're going to be asking, like, what's wrong with us that we need this? Or why do you need a coach? We just hired you. You're supposed to come here and save us. You're supposed to come here and lead us. Now you have a coach. It's this whole culture of they don't know how to appreciate it the right way. And again, I'm not talking bad about the 2-year system. I work with them every day. It's just a different aspect. And so we have some coaching contracts with 2-year districts and colleges, but they don't look at it the same way. And so for some of your listeners that want to get into higher ed, or maybe they're already in higher ed, they want to do the 2-year, it's a little bit different. And so if you go to a 2-year and you say things like, oh yeah, you all at this university, because it's not a university, it's a college, they just start to tune you out right away. They're much more sensitive to that. They're much more sensitive to outsiders coming in. And that's a very big, so it's quite different than a lot of people think. If you're working at a 2-year institution and a 4-year person comes, you're much more defensive. But if you're at a 4-year and a 2-year expert comes in, you're very welcoming. It doesn't matter what don't it's a philosophy. We're here, like we appreciate the help, like we appreciate the different perspectives coming in. So that's what we've learned as an organization. That's what I've learned as well as an individual. But that's what, for your listeners, it's something you have to get your head around. You kind of learn as you go how to adapt your style and training and terminology to the 2-year system.
Wow, that is fantastic advice. I love the idea of adjusting your language and how to sell yourself to the different types of institutions. And, guilty as charged. I mean, I come from not just 4-year, but, master's and doctoral granting institutions, R1s, R2s. I have a little bit of experience also working in a small liberal arts college, but it certainly is a different world. And you're right. So the language that is being used is different. And you sharing the observation that they will tune you out if you use the wrong words. Maybe, once they will forgive you, but the second time they're definitely going to say that person doesn't know what they're talking about in terms of our needs and our world and our experience. I think that's super helpful. To wrap things up, are there maybe 1 or 2 things that you could think of that you would like to share with coaches who are trying to enter higher education as a coaching field, who may come from the outside and don't quite know how to get started?
Yeah. So one thing is, I'll give you some words of encouragement is keep trying. Don't give up. There's a lot of help that's needed. And when we were talking earlier about contracts, for example, that might have requirements, honestly, a lot of places, they don't know what they want, really. They kind of know I need this or that. But then when you start peeling back the layers, you're like, oh, I'd be really good at this. I've been through this. I sat through this before. And at that point, it doesn't really matter if you worked at an institution like that, a 2-year, 4-year private nonprofit. It doesn't really matter. It's, again, that gets back to the fit. So the words of encouragement is don't give up, keep trying. And we've gotten a lot of engagements, and I'm sure you have, Tim, as well, where you kind of gave up on it, kind of forgot about it, and it just kind of comes through. And it's because you just were persistent and you were just there saying, look, I'm just not pushing, not being salesy. We're here to help in any way when the time is right. And I think that's what they're really looking for, is just to have that peace of mind that there's folks out there, good folks out there that are really trustworthy, that are there to help when the time is right. So some tips, I guess, for folks that are looking to get into higher ed coaching, or maybe you're already in and looking to expand. So one way, again, these aren't magic bullets. These aren't like, rabbits coming out of hats. This is the tough work that you have to do. You look at RFPs, you can search for them. You can get on things like RFP Mart and whatnot. They do come out a lot. There's a lot of kind of sideways to higher ed, a lot of like 501c3s that are part of an institution. Maybe they're not part of it, but they're around education. Those are great opportunities as well. They need a lot of help and support. Municipalities need a lot of support as well. But colleges and universities do put a lot of RFPs out for help, so that's one way. It's not fun. It's not fun to do an RFPs, but it's there. You can look at renewals, so you can always pick up the phone. And this is actually quite easy. If you just do Google search, you see that, hey, all the universities and colleges in my state, they've already got pools of coaching or whatnot. Just call them and say, hey, what's the next cycle start for re-entrance of coaches for that pool? Because it always happens. It's always 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, something like that. And then just put in your calendar, a month early when it ends, and then you get that opportunity. So you don't have to keep waiting and asking. That's a good way as well. But LinkedIn, Facebook groups, it's always just to tell people, hey, you're a coach. This is what you do. And you got to start somewhere. You have to let them know, hey, had a great career, switching over to coaching, or maybe that's always been my career. Let them know, because everyone's looking for that support every once in a while. Yeah. And there's a lot of folks that we have that also do coaching. They've done a lot of higher ed coaching, but now they're coaching at General Electric or, some of these other big companies. It's they're trying to expand and diversify kind of what their capabilities are. And I think that's fantastic too. And then the last thing is just keep the understanding it's going to take time to break in. I applaud anyone that goes out and builds their own business, puts their name on the marquee and says, I'm a coach, this is my business, this is my name now. Just understand it's going to take time to break in. It's going to take time to get into any new industry. In higher ed especially, it's going to be kind of tough. But once you get in, you find the right fit, find some coaching engagements under your belt, it just rolls from there. That's what happened to us. We had zero business in 2017, zero coaching business. And so over time, it's just kind of grown and snowballed, and we're still growing with new contracts and different things. But at the same time, our credibility and our trust and our references and our testimonials continue to grow. That's a snowballing that has to take place that allows you to kind of build a really strong foundation to hire at. So that's what we would say. And I know some of your listeners might be like, well, I don't know if there's a really good tip there other than just keep trying. Like, honestly, like it can be completely frustrating at times, but just don't give up and keep trying. And you never know what's going to happen. You find the one opportunity, that's the gateway to get in everything else.
Great words to live and coach by, as I like to say. And it takes that little push to land that first contract. And then, you just have to stick with your brand and be trustworthy and just build those relationships. And then things will happen organically. So, James, thank you so very much for coming on, for sharing your experience and your wisdom. I learned a lot today, and I hope that our listeners and our audience did as well. So thank you again for coming on, and thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed today's episode, please click the like button and subscribe to this channel. Your support really means the world to us. And as always, you can find more information on this episode, our guest, and today's topic at our companion website, higheredcoaching.us and leadershipimagined.com/podcast. See you next time.